Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on those two bins that are in the corner. Like a lot of my other systems, I was coping with some excess dampness in those systems. It's been 10 days now since we last checked in on these two systems. You also might notice that out in front of the two systems is a bucket with some shredded paper in it. It's really shredded paper and cardboard mixed together. And it's the stuff that we've been applying with the feedings over the past couple check-ins to these two bins to see if that dry stuff might help absorb some moisture into itself. And even those paper coverings, last time you saw them, they were a little bit more spread out in both systems. They were kind of applied in such a way that they would cover more of the system's surface area, and they've since been slid on top of each other and moved in to allow for airflow around the entire perimeter of the paper covering. So both systems got that same treatment too since the last time you saw them. Well, they're due for a feeding, I believe, after 10 days. So we're going to get them up on the bench, see if they need some more dry bedding to go with their feeding. So let's get to work. Like I do sometimes, I came down prepared with a little bit of information to share with you about these two systems. They're, as of today, 137 days in service and fed 12 times so far. So this is feeding number 13. I believe the feeding interval between feedings last time was maybe 14, 15 days. Today we've opted to wait only 10 days between feedings. And when I reviewed the video of the last check-in, I also noticed that the types of foods that they got were things that were unlikely to still be around as leftovers even after only 10 days. Part of the reason I thought we'd be in okay shape to come back and feed these guys again. I don't have coffee for the worms today. That means I'm not prepared to replace feeding zone indicators, which are just coffee filters. So one of these smaller top coverings came off with the larger, drier top coverings. So I was even thinking, since I don't have replacement coffee filters, we would try to keep these going one more time, although this one has been nibbled in half. But I think we're just going to reuse it because we don't have anything else to use as a feeding zone indicator. But those other coverings, those two, I thought that those might go in with the feeding as possible additional bedding. So we must have planted something here, which is really enjoying the material into which it was placed. Kind of makes me think that we might have put a piece of tomato there. You can see it really took off growing. At this point it's just turning into worm food. So it seems unlikely that we would find many leftovers of stuff like cucumber peel or the end of a head of lettuce or any of those sort of things that I believe that the last feeding consisted of. When we came in here last time, we were skeptical as to whether or not the dry paper and cardboard shreds that I added, if they'd kind of done their job and sucked a bunch of moisture into themselves. And we did find even last time too that the previous application of the dry paper and cardboard seemed to draw a lot of moisture into that paper and cardboard because it was all damp. Most of it also showing signs of worms traveling through it. So it shows that they've adopted it as bedding that they like and they're hanging out in, nibbling on it, filling it with beautiful castings. So even though I've got my bucket of dry stuff on the ready, and we could certainly apply more of it today, give them a nice third jolt of bedding materials that are nice and dry, because that's just something I normally don't do much. If I've got shredded paper cardboard, it's usually coming out of a combination of the shredded paper cardboard. I throw leaves in there, I dampen the whole thing, it sits in a tub for many days on end, kind of just soaking and all the flavors sort of blending together, and hopefully by the time I'm using my prepared bedding, it's something that the worms would generally prefer over anything else. So to just put in dry stuff that's, stuff that you might imagine to be a little bit harsh for worms, does seem to get adopted pretty quickly. Oops, what happened? Little lid, metal lid for this container of breadcrumbs that I bought home from my mom's. A little bit left, so it's going to be the final feeding in which we're going to be using that stuff. I've been trying over the course of the past few feedings to move that stuff along and empty the container. I think we're in good shape now to move these aside. We'll need them at the end after we've leveled off, but these pieces of paper resting underneath those larger pieces of paper to me seem like they're not doing a whole lot, and it seemed to me like maybe instead of shredded paper and cardboard and stuff, we can just use these pretty heavily seasoned pieces of paper down in the feeding area. These things, even though they're not all that damp, are probably crawling with all kinds of bacteria and microbes and all the sort of stuff where just a little tiny touch of moisture coming with the frozen foods or with whatever will activate this material as, quite possibly a kind of bedding that the worms would favor over just about anything else. So my presumption is that they're going to appreciate that. And then the stuff that I got for them is a banana peel per system. Not bringing all that much moisture in it with it. Even this stuff here, the potato peels, they too don't seem to be such a juicy, savory thing, but it will definitely kick out a little bit of moisture as it starts to break down. Had I not frozen it, I don't think that would be the case, but since it was all frozen, I believe that the stuff will release a good bit of its moisture as it thaws. And what else do I have here? Well, the breadcrumbs. Let's make sure we get them in there, and then we'll be all set with feeding these night crawlers, African night crawler twin bins. This is one of the few examples where the population count estimate that we collectively, establish with input from the viewers during my worm bin launches. So this is one of those rare occasions where we do believe to have an equal number of worms living in both systems. And I think I've only got one or two other systems like that where I've got an actual twin bin, if you want to call it that. So sometimes I'll add grit, sometimes I'll add my worm chow, sometimes I'll add different types of bedding other than what we just used here. Sometimes you just use whatever's on hand. So I thought that those top covering papers were a little bit redundant since we've got other larger ones resting right on top of them. To me, they seem like the right stuff to include as bedding with today's feeding. I don't know, what do you think about that? Using stuff that's already been sort of primed and getting staged for that sort of use by being some sort of an element in the bin. To me, it seems like as soon as you put it into service as, bedding, it's already full of all the goodies that the worms really like. So I believe that these pieces of paper here too, going back not only just 10 days to the previous feeding, but I believe that they were placed on the bins during the feeding prior to that, 15 days earlier. So those two large top covering pieces of paper have already been in the bins for 3+ weeks too, so I bet you they would work just as well going down as bedding material in the feeding areas. That piece of paper towel I threw it on the top, that's just the direct contrast, where it's just a fresh piece of paper just sitting around, time for it to go, throw it in the worm bin. Now down here on the edge, I'm feeling a good bit of moisture. Before we close up shop after a feeding, a lot of times lately we've been just spending an extra minute or two just to make sure the material on the outskirts of the bins are in as good shape as what we saw in the middle during the feeding, just in case there's some sort of a big night and day sort of thing. It's good to be aware of it rather than it just sort of got kind of going under the radar, possibly, little bits of signs or whatever of things that might be going on that need attention. So here again, everything looks quite nice. I've definitely inspected some of my systems where I check the outskirts and I don't see that much worm traffic, but when I see a whole bunch of worms in this stuff like I'm seeing here, it kind of tells me that from a moisture perspective, at least the worms do seem to approve of what's going out there because they're out there in pretty good numbers. Since I feed down the middle in most cases, that is kind of where you would expect to see most of the worms, around the food and where the fresh bedding and stuff's getting applied, but sometimes they just seem to like to roam around and get out into the outreaches of the systems. So one more outer edge to check on this one here in bin number 2, and I think we're probably prepared to give this system a good bill of health. I think one of the main things that I've just been kind of silently looking over and, you know, pondering while checking things through was just the general impression I get from moisture, you know, because of all the things we've had to do lately. And I think that those last 2 check-ins where we just put a whole bunch of nice dry stuff in there, we already saw in both systems how nicely that stuff sucked up the moisture into itself, making it all nice and damp and useful to the worms as either bedding or food source, presumably both. So I like the way things are looking here. That's what we're going to be able to get as far as our feeding zone indicator. Next time I think we're probably going to have to swap these out because we're not even going to look this. They're not even going to look like this anymore. They're probably both going to be pretty heavily deteriorated. And you know, I'm almost prepared to say we don't need to ventilate. So I like this idea of sort of putting these 2 pieces opposite of each other, so a huge amount of the surface area is covered. Maybe leaving a couple little spots uncovered, but for the most part covering the entire system to hopefully not let any further moisture exit, because I don't think we need to. I think things are in really great shape in both of these systems. So I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away. I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.